Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into some pretty foundational ideas. We're going to be acting like philosophers today.
I like that.
Yeah.
You game.
I'm game. I was born ready.
All right. So, we're going to be digging beneath the surface to understand the concepts that have shaped thought for literally centuries. And our guide for this intellectual workout is Iamblichus. Sounds familiar.
Absolutely. Yeah, Iamblichus. He lived around the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. Syrian Neoplatonist philosopher.
Okay.
And he really wasn't just, another name in the dusty history books. He was really a pivotal figure who took the ideas of Plotinus, right, and refined them, expanded upon them.
So he's taking these huge influential ideas and he's like,
Yeah.
okay, let's see what I can do with this.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's interesting. He actually learned these ideas from Porphyry, who was Plotinus's editor.
Okay.
So that's kind of a fun little, connection.
Yeah.
But by doing this, he essentially laid the groundwork for the Neoplatonism that we see flourish in the Athenian school of philosophy in the centuries that followed. So really, to understanding Iamblichus is key to understanding a really major trajectory in Western thought.
Okay, so big deal.
Yeah,
Big deal.
Big deal.
Huge deal.
Yeah.
So what makes his work so interesting for us today, besides, all these abstract philosophical arguments, Iamblichus really had this fascinating approach. He was trying to bridge the gap between philosophy and religious and theological traditions, and he even came up with this concept called theurgy.
Yeah, Theurgy. I mean, that's really where the action's at with Iamblichus.
Okay.
And to really get into his head, to understand what he was thinking, we have a couple of his own writings, right? We have parts of his on Pythagoreanism, and we have his reply to Porphyry. That one is quite important.
Okay.
But, a lot of what we know of Iamblichus actually comes from fragments, snippets, little mentions and later commentaries on Plato and Aristotle. We also have some of his letters.
Wow. So it's like we got to be like philosophical detectives.
Exactly. We're piecing together this picture from all these scattered pieces of evidence. And that's part of the fun.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. So what's our mission for this deep dive?
I think our mission today is to try to uncover Iamblichus's core contributions
Okay.
and ask the question, why is he considered such a turning point in Neoplatonism? What are the key new ideas or approaches that he brought to the table? And, by the end of this, hopefully you'll have a real sense of how philosophy, religion, even mathematics all intertwined in the late ancient world.
Very cool. I like it. So his impact was huge, you said.
Yeah. Karl Prechter, very famous historian of philosophy, actually called Iamblichus the second founder of Neoplatonism
Really?
after Plotinus. And he even compares Iamblichus to Chrysippus in terms of his role in shaping Stoicism. I think it is important to remember here that, when we say Neoplatonism, we're not talking about some, monolithic entity like you might find in some later schools of thought.
Okay.
This was a broad movement with shared ideas across different centers of learning in the Roman Empire. But Iamblichus's influence on how later Neoplatonists thought and practiced philosophy was huge.
Okay, so it's not like they had like a clubhouse or membership cards or anything like that.
No membership cards, but there's definitely a very clear line of intellectual inheritance here. So Iamblichus studied with Porphyry, and Porphyry, of course, studied directly with Plotinus.
Got it. Okay.
So there was a direct connection back to the founder of Neoplatonism.
Right. So Iamblichus, he's got these direct connections to the founder of Neoplatonism, but didn't he establish his own philosophical school?
He did. He established his own school in Syria, which was separate from Plotinus's original circle in Rome. So this really shows us that philosophical ideas, they weren't static. They were being actively developed, adapted in different regions.
So people were really wrestling with these concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. And Iamblichus was definitely one of those people, while he built upon Plotinus's core ideas, I'm thinking about things like his metaphysics, his understanding of the one, his engagement with all these foundational texts.
Okay.
His own originality really shines through.
Yeah.
Both in his specific theories and, importantly, in his methods.
So he was a very unique thinker. He had his own spin on things. And speaking of methods, one of Iamblichus's key contributions to how we act as philosophers was his approach to understanding these really authoritative works like Plato and Aristotle. He didn't just read them. He saw them as having this really profound meaning, almost sacred meaning, what he called their nous, their intellect, and he aimed to uncover that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was really trying to go beyond the surface level reading of these texts and get at their deeper meaning. And the way he did this was very structured.
Okay.
He was guided by four main principles of what we call exegesis, or interpretation.
Okay.
So the first principle was that he believed that any truly authoritative work would be internally consistent, and it would aim to demonstrate a specific scopos, or an overarching goal.
Got it.
So he took this very seriously. He took it so seriously that he would interpret even seemingly separate parts of a text, like an introduction, in light of this main aim. For example, Iamblichus saw the goal of Plato's Timaeus, for example, as the theory of nature. And so he interpreted its prologue, accordingly.
Okay.
His second principle kind of builds on this, in that he viewed literary works as living organisms.
Okay.
This is an idea that he gets from Plato's Phaedrus.
That's powerful. So it's like a text. It's almost got its own purpose. Every part's interconnected. It contributes to the whole.
Yeah, exactly. A living, breathing text.
I like it. What were the other principles?
The third principle is that Iamblichus developed what we could almost call a kind of philosophical curriculum.
Okay.
So he identifies 12 Platonic dialogues that he considered essential for understanding the entirety of Plato's thought.
Okay.
And so he starts with the Alcibiades, which he sees as kind of the introductory seed
Got it.
containing all the core themes. Then he arranges the dialogues according to philosophical branches.
Right.
And he also considered Aristotle's distinction between praxis, right, or action and ethics,
Right.
and thesuria,
Okay.
or theory and contemplation. So it was this deliberate path he was laying out for philosophical understanding.
It's not just reading individual dialogues. It's understanding how they fit together in a larger philosophical system.
Exactly.
Very cool. Can you give us a sense of how he categorized some of those dialogues?
Sure, yeah. So for the praxis-oriented dialogues, he placed the Gorgias under the category of politics.
Yeah.
He placed the Phaedo under catharsis, which he linked to his particular understanding of how the virtues can purify the soul.
Okay.
On the Theurgy side, he categorized the Cratylus and the Theaetetus as dealing with logic. And this might surprise us today. He grouped the Sophist and Politicus under physics.
Wow.
He saw the Phaedrus and the Symposium as focused on theology, and he considers the Philebus, with its exploration of the good, as the pinnacle of this initial cycle of study. And then he had a second more advanced cycle was just the Timaeus on physics and the Parmenides on theology, and the Parmenides holding the more fundamental position there.
Wow.
So this very structured approach really highlights how he's aiming for a systematic and comprehensive grasp of Plato's philosophy.
Very cool. So what was his fourth principle?
His fourth principle was symphonia, or agreement.
Okay.
And what this means is that Iamblichus believed in finding harmony not only within a single author's works, but also between different authoritative figures. So, a key point here is that he differs from Plotinus because Iamblichus fully integrates Aristotle into his Platonist framework.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he also gave significant weight to the writings attributed to Pythagoras and the Pseudo-Pythagorean corpus, right?
Yeah.
He sees them as part of this larger unified body of ancient wisdom.
So he's actively trying to synthesize these different philosophical traditions, look for common ground.
He is, yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. I mean, and wasn't it more than just the major Greek philosophers he drew upon?
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
He also relied heavily on texts that he considered divinely inspired.
Okay.
So the most important of these are the Chaldean oracles, right? Which are a collection of poetic verses with these Neoplatonic themes.
Right.
And then also the Pseudo-Orphic Rhapsodies.
Okay.
Now, we know that he wrote an extensive commentary on the Chaldean oracles,
Really?
which really underscores their importance in his philosophical and theological system.
Very cool. This kind of brings us to another really major part of Iamblichus's thought, which is his shift towards religion and theology within Neoplatonism.
Right.
This seems like a pretty significant evolution in how you might act as a philosopher in the ancient world.
It is. It's a pivotal development. It had a lasting impact on Neoplatonism, even influenced how it was understood later by Christian thinkers.
Wow.
His reply to Porphyry really is our main window into this shift. In this text, he directly engages with Porphyry's more intellectual approach, to theological and religious questions.
Okay.
Traditionally, scholars have viewed Iamblichus's emphasis on ritual and theurgy as this kind of departure from rational philosophy.
Oh, okay.
But more recent scholarship has actually been reevaluating this
Okay.
and highlighting the philosophical reasoning that underpins his approach.
Interesting. So it wasn't just like abandoning reason for blind faith.
No, no, not at all.
What were the philosophical arguments that he used to support this integration of theology and ritual?
Well, in his reply, Iamblichus carefully distinguishes between philosophy, theology, and theurgy, each with their own distinct methods for accessing truth. And so while theurgy, which involves these ritualistic practices, certainly goes beyond what we might think of as purely rational or philosophical inquiry today, Iamblichus's advocacy for theurgy is actually rooted in his complex philosophical understanding of the nature of divine beings and the capabilities of the human soul.
Okay.
So he argued that certain truths and certain kinds of connection with the divine could only be achieved through these ritual acts.
Really?
So it's more accurate to see it as this deliberate and philosophically grounded expansion of the ways in which one can engage with reality and with divine.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. And how did this manifest in his understanding of, the divine and the cosmos?
Well, in a couple of key ways. First, he developed what we can call a Platonic theology. Now, whether he actually wrote a specific work with that title is debated by scholars. But we do know that he took Plotinus's connection between the hypotheses in Plato's Parmenides and fundamental metaphysical principles a step further
Right.
by explicitly linking the metaphysical reading of the Parmenides to the gods of the Greek pantheon. So his interpretation of Plato became both a system of understanding ultimate reality and a way of understanding the traditional gods.
Okay.
Secondly, he sought to create this harmonious account of different theological traditions, Egyptian, Chaldaic through the oracles, and Greek represented by figures like, Pythagoras and Plato.
Okay.
He held the Chaldean oracles and the Egyptian Hermetic texts in particularly high esteem, even suggesting that the Egyptian tradition was the original source of Greek philosophy.
Really? Wow. So Iamblichus really forged his own path within Neoplatonism. What were some of the core ideas that distinguished him from Plotinus and Porphyry and influenced these later Neoplatonists like Proclus?
Yeah, there are several key views that really set him apart. He argued, for example, that no superior part of the embodied soul remains in the intelligible realm untainted, right? This is different from Plotinus.
Okay.
He also stressed the necessity of theurgical rites, which are revealed by the gods, for the soul's ascent. So philosophical contemplation alone is not sufficient.
Okay.
His project of harmonizing various theological traditions with this, strong emphasis on Pythagoras and the Chaldean oracles was also distinctive.
Right.
He also develops a more intricate and detailed metaphysical hierarchy with, more intermediary levels between the one and the sensible world than we see in Plotinus.
Okay.
And finally, there's this clear tendency in his work towards this more, I would say, systematic and scholastic approach to philosophical inquiry and the interpretation of text.
So it wasn't just a straight continuation, right, from Plotinus. I mean, there were these debates, differing approaches. People were figuring out, how to be a philosopher.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reception of his philosophy in the 4th century was not universally positive.
Yeah.
There was, for example, this group called the School of Pergamon around his student Edesius, which the historian Eunapius portrays as very heavily focused on Theurgy and religious practices, sometimes even with political undertones in the context of, this changing Roman Empire. But I think that might be an oversimplification.
Okay.
We know Iamblichus had many students. There were definitely internal disagreements among them.
Okay.
For instance, Theodorus of Essene reportedly reverted to a more purely intellectualist Platonism,
Yeah.
in the vein of Plotinus,
Right.
while Eusebius of Myndus supposedly rejected theurgy altogether.
Really? Wow.
And others, like Maximus of Ephesus, fully embraced it. So yeah, there's definitely a lot going on there.
Wow, yeah. So Iamblichus's ideas, they had some real-world tangible effects, right?
They did. For example, his teachings provided the philosophical framework for Emperor Julian's attempt to revive paganism.
Yeah.
In the mid-4th century. But there was also intellectual resistance to his ideas.
Oh.
So Themistius, for example, who was this prominent orator and intellectual, criticized Iamblichus's theurgy and his reliance on Pythagoreanism, even questioning the authenticity of the Pythagorean texts that Iamblichus was using.
Okay.
So while Iamblichus's philosophy gained this significant traction, it also faced considerable debate, disagreement in its own time.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. There are going to be people who agree with you and people who don't. Let's dive a little deeper into Iamblichus's own philosophical system.
Okay.
It's often described as a more complex and refined version of Plotinus's.
Yeah, it's true. Iamblichus really elaborates on the hierarchical structures that are just hinted at in Plotinus and Porphyry.
Okay.
Now, his account of the one is somewhat complex, partly because our main source on this, Damascus, he's reporting indirectly.
Okay.
But we do know that Iamblichus disagreed with Porphyry's concept of a first principle that is somehow coordinated with the intelligible triad, which is the next level of reality. So Iamblichus posits two levels even beyond that.
Okay.
A wholly unspeakable principle, an idea that later thinkers like Theodorus of Assine and Damascus will adopt, though Proclus will not.
Okay.
And another principle that is uncoordinated with the triad.
Got it.
So it seems Iamblichus is trying to emphasize both the absolute transcendence of the very first principle, its utter beyondness, and its role as the ultimate cause of, everything that exists.
So he's really pushing the boundaries of what we can even conceive of when it comes to this ultimate origin.
He is. He's going beyond Plotinus in that sense.
Okay. So what comes after these really fundamental levels in his system?
Okay. So below these ultimate principles, he places the intelligible triad of limit, the unlimited, and the one being. Now, this arrangement clearly shows the influence of Plato's Philebus.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that Damascus actually links this triad to the Pythagorean sequence of monad, dyad, triad, and ultimately to the Chaldean oracles, father, power, and intellect.
Okay.
So it's highly likely that Iamblichus himself is making these connections, given his deep respect for those traditions.
Yeah.
It really demonstrates this project of philosophical and theological synthesis that he was working on.
And this idea of the Henads, right? I've heard that term before. What are they? And did Iamblichus introduce this idea into Neoplatonism?
Yeah. So the origin of the Henads, which means unities, is still debated by scholars today.
Okay.
So they're conceived of as really the very first multiplicity to emerge from the one.
Okay.
Existing even beyond being itself.
Wow.
And so their role is really to bridge this immense gap, right, between the absolute singularity of the one and the differentiated world of the intelligibles. Yeah. Now, if Iamblichus did introduce this concept, it would mean that he predates Syrianus and Proclus, who were really the first thinkers who discussed them in detail, by almost a century.
Wow.
So there are some clues pointing toward Iamblichian authorship. For example, we have Proclus's statement that Iamblichus identified God and the gods as the subject of the first hypothesis of Plato's Parmenides. So these gods could well be these self-sufficient entities that immediately follow the one, maybe referred to interchangeably as Henads or intelligible gods, before the more rigid terminology developed by Syrianus and Proclus.
So he was very meticulous, it sounds like, in mapping out this entire landscape of reality, and he was using, finer gradations than his predecessors.
Absolutely. Damascus even states that, according to Iamblichus, the degree of divinity is directly correlated to the degree of unity.
Okay.
So the higher a being is on the scale of reality, the more unified it is,
Right.
the less differentiated it is. Yeah. And so that makes it less accessible to our intellect, to conceptual understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's knowable primarily through intuition.
Okay.
And we see this idea present in his reply to Porphyry, where unity, friendship, and goodness are described as fundamental attributes of the gods. So this concept of a gradual unfolding or diffusion of unity was Iamblichus's significant contribution to this Neoplatonic idea of reality as this continuum.
Okay.
Kind of softening the sharper distinctions that Plotinus sometimes drew between different levels of being. And so the term unification, it became really, really key.
Yep.
And it even hints in some passages at this potential prioritization of direct mystical experience over purely intellectual understanding.
Right. Okay. And didn't he also introduce this distinction between the intelligible and the intellective?
Yeah. This is one of Iamblichus's most enduring contributions to Neoplatonic terminology. So before him, noeteron, which means intellective, was often used as this general term for anything that thinks,
right,
or that is characterized by intellect.
Okay.
But Iamblichus gives it this much more specific technical meaning. He specifically designates the order of gods. that exist immediately below the intelligible realm. So these are the deities that have a demiurgic or creative function in shaping the cosmos.
Okay.
And this distinction will be adopted and further developed by later figures in this tradition, including, even Emperor Julian.
So he's not just adding layers, he's refining the roles and functions within this divine hierarchy. So
Yeah.
how does like the demiurge, the creator god, fit into this revised picture?
Right. So the idea of distinguishing between seen and seeing principles in relation to creation goes back to earlier interpretations of Plato's Timaeus,
Oh.
where the demiurge is seen as looking to an external model, the forms, to fashion the cosmos.
Okay.
Now, Plotinus actually argued against the intelligibles existing outside of the intellect itself. But Iamblichus actually leans towards a more traditional reading, explicitly subordinating the demiurge to the intelligible model. And given his development of the one as this even higher principle than intellect, the demiurge ends up with somewhat of a secondary status.
Okay.
Right. He's surpassed by numerous other divine entities, including the intelligible model itself.
Got it.
So in Iamblichus' system, the demiurge becomes the third member of a paternal triad within this larger group of 7 intellective gods, known as a hebdomad.
Okay.
So from this point forward in Neoplatonism, equating the demiurge directly with the first principle was no longer a viable position.
Okay, got it. And so this more elaborate hierarchy allowed him to, more readily integrate these traditional Greek gods into his philosophical framework.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Iamblichus fully embraces Plotinus's idea that the intelligibles are alive, they're powerful, they're active, they possess this kind of internal multiplicity. And so this allows him to map the divine names and figures from various, theological traditions, Orphic myths, the Chaldee oracles, Plato's dialogues concerning the intelligible realm onto this conceptual framework. So the Platonic demiurge, for example, could be identified with the Zeus of Hellenic tradition.
Okay.
And this trend will become even more pronounced in later thinkers like Julian, and it culminates in Proclus's extensive Platonic theology. But the general principle was that every significant philosophical concept within the intelligible world has this corresponding manifestation as a distinct divine level or entity within the theological sphere.
So it sounds like a really detailed and systematic attempt to reconcile philosophy and these traditional religious beliefs. What about the entities further down the cosmic chain? Like nature and matter.
Right.
How did Iamblichus understand their place, in this hierarchy?
Well, Iamblichus's concept of nature aligns fairly closely with, standard Neoplatonic views. So nature is seen as this productive power emanating from the celestial gods.
Mm-hmm.
It's responsible for the generation of cosmic beings.
Okay.
However, it's not seen as acting according to reason in the same way that, higher intellect does.
Okay.
So this leads to a certain ambiguity in its portrayal.
Okay.
Sometimes nature is viewed positively as this part of divine providence.
Right.
While at other times it's associated with negativity, almost like a kind of unruly force.
Okay.
And this is influenced by ideas found in the Chaldean oracles.
Okay.
And this ambiguity also, links nature closely with the concepts of fate and the influence of astrology.
So nature has this kind of dual quality to it, both a source of life and potentially a source of disorder. What about matter?
Matter in Iamblichus also has this kind of dual character.
Okay.
It's integrated into the overall cosmic order, but it's also associated with corporeality and the potential for evil. In the reply to Porphyry, he often describes matter as a source of impurity and corruption.
Okay.
However, there is also evidence suggesting the possibility of a more, you could say, unified or monistic interpretation.
Okay.
Where even matter ultimately derives from the demiurgic triad, without any inherent imperfection.
Okay.
Some later testimonies even attribute to Iamblichus the view that evil has no real independent existence.
Okay.
But rather this kind of secondary dependent status.
Got it. So one of the overarching principles in his system is this really this hierarchical view of causality,
Right.
where higher levels directly influence the lower ones.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So for Iamblichus, an effect doesn't possess any true, independent being apart from its cause.
Okay.
Right? So any apparent addition or difference in the effect is seen as this kind of diminution or deficiency compared to the higher cause.
Mhm.
And while this idea wasn't totally new to Neoplatonism, Iamblichus applied it with a remarkable consistency throughout his system.
Okay.
And it really shapes his understanding of the soul and its relationship to higher realities. He emphasizes that the higher principles always maintain their power and control over the lower realms. And this actually leads to the idea that the primary function of effects is to become receptive to the causal influence that is flowing from their sources, a concept that he terms epitidiotos, or receptivity.
Okay.
And so this process of adaptation, helps to explain the diversity and variation that we observe in the world.
Right.
He also articulates this important principle, which is everything is in everything according to its property.
Okay.
So this signifies a kind of universal interconnectedness throughout reality.
Saw it.
But it also emphasizes that superior beings retain their unique prerogatives and powers.
Mhm.
And so this principle helped him to balance this idea of divine immanence, right? The presence of the divine within the world, with this equally important concept of divine transcendence, the idea that the divine ultimately surpasses the world.
Got it. And his program of scientific theology, it involved a lot of new terminology and organizational structures, I understand.
It did, yeah. He introduces new terms like diakosmoi and taxis to refer to specific divine orders and arrangements, right? This is something that you don't really see in Plotinus's writings.
Okay.
He wasn't afraid to, develop this complex systems as long as he could ultimately demonstrate the underlying unity of reality.
Right.
He frequently employed these recurring metaphysical laws and numerical groupings. For example, the triad representing moni remaining, protos procession, and epistrophe return, to illustrate this fundamental unity and multiplicity. And these triads are a prime example of what modern scholars call the law of mean terms, right? Which is this idea that there needs to be this mediating third element to connect any two levels in the hierarchy. And that ensures continuity throughout this holistic view of reality. So essentially what he's doing is he's taking the existing Neoplatonic framework and systemizing it, almost deifying it as this comprehensive and coherent explanation of all existence, actively working to avoid any kind of fundamental dualism or separation in reality.
Yeah. So Iamblichus also really engaged with Pythagoreanism and mathematics.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
How did these areas of study inform his, philosophical worldview?
Yeah. So as we discussed earlier, right, he placed the dual principles of limit pitcheres and the unlimited apparent at a very high level in his system, just below the one, but above the intelligible realm. So these principles were central to the Pythagorean tradition. They were also explored by